Dr. Wolfgang Wein has been working in medical imaging computing for more than 20 years, covering the full path from early research to product implementation. He earned his doctorate at the Technical University of Munich in the Computer-Aided Medical Procedures group. Then he proceeded at Siemens in Princeton, New Jersey, where he worked in the topics of interventional navigation and medical imaging. Then in 2012, he founded ImFusion, where he and his team help other companies to turn innovation into actual commercialized products. In his talk today, he will show us how to combine classical image processing, real-time visual computing, and AI into modern medical imaging systems, and how to actually bring such software into the real world of medical environments. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Wolfgang Wein.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to have a large audience here. It's a huge honor to be here. I don't know much about the audience, so I will take a step back and explain a little bit the challenges of what we do also. First, company overview is pretty broad, but should also explain many of the imaging modalities and the technologies that we need to use. Some more impressive, hopefully, interventional guidance highlights. And if there's time and people are interested, I go into some software architecture details, and hopefully there's time for discussion. So I try to do 35 minutes, and then I'm basically open if there's some context missing, if you interrupt me even along the way, but let's see how it goes. As a very brief motivation, what we try to do in computer-assisted surgery is basically guiding clinicians to a target inside the human body in the broadest sense, right? So it's the equivalent of a navigation system for a car, and if you make that car autonomous, then it's robotic surgery in a way, right? So we have sort of these analogies. I further motivate this now with a bunch of movie and Hollywood scenes. This is actually a scene from the Severance show that is set in the present, and what you see there is they're injecting, it's basically a guided needle procedure. This is ultrasound, but it already looks kind of like MRI, so you have some modality synthesis there, and some chip is being implanted, and the whole show is about separating the work and the private lives of that person. And the point of that is we're doing this. So this is like not the chip thing, but the guided insertion. And this is state-of-the-art, but what it also shows is that this kind of procedure is indeed, in fact, becoming more commoditized. It's almost like walk in and walk out the same day, right? So some neuroneedle procedure, you could do it this way. Taking it a step further, actually, we would make this more autonomous and more robotic. And I like this movie scene. I've been showing it for many years, a lot there. So what you have here is sort of a medical pod where that supposedly supports a number of different procedures, and what is pretty interesting that it's a patient-driven UI where the patient even says what their indication is. In this case, she's just saying she needs an urgent C-section or something. And then you have all sorts of robotics tools. You have pretty advanced X-ray imaging. This could be some multispectral X-ray or AI-enhanced sort of X-ray video analysis. Then you have very advanced surface tracking and motion compensation on the surface in real time and very robust. Also here, everything's moving, right? Everything's organic. And so a lot of surgical tools that are quite adapted. They come out with different arms. So obviously this is a lot of work, right? But I mean, it's possible, I would say. And then, of course, after this opening, so there's a little bit some gory and unrealistic aspects to this. But what happens now is, you might know what happens now. What we have there is some pretty impressive domain adaptation, right? Because this is not a human embryo that is being pulled out. So when we would train models here, then we would probably like this system would crash and don't know what to do anymore, I assume, right? That might be a little bit of a problem. And also here that the system just continues and sort of, yeah, it's domain adapted. There's some final X-ray imaging to validate that the step taking out that thing was okay, and then there's sort of everything stitched up, all automatic. The point here is of all this that we're working on this. So this is actually what we're working on. So this is what we do. And the more I think about it, actually, this is all possible. There's nothing fundamentally not possible here. It's slightly different with the next video I'm quickly going to show. This is taking this even further to a whole treatment platform. So what this is basically is you have a scanner that is very fast. So it scans. That's like a really super fast CT scan. It detects exactly what it is. And then it's reatomizing. So that step is kind of a treatment platform where I see some fundamental physics missing to make this possible. But the rest of that, it's basically the same thing. We're working on some aspects of it as well. Some aspects are actually easier than in the last video, because here, the diagnostic imaging is the same platform that does the treatment, so we don't have to register the data. And so this brings me to a little bit more introduction. Why is this difficult? Why is any of this difficult, right? So, and we do image fusion in this company, right? This is also in the name. So oftentimes we have large-scale pre-op imaging, and these are voxel data. This is 3D CT, MRI, can also be functional imaging like PET. And basically it's rigid, it's static, and it has a certain patient setup. In CT you have to take the arms up often, and there's many details basically that we know about, but it's high quality, a diagnostic grade, and it's large field of view. Sometimes it's the entire body, right? So this is what we have there. On the other end, we have intraoperative imaging. Three main modalities are ultrasound, X-ray, endoscopic video feeds. There's many variants to these. There's functional variants to these. And they have incredible modality differences. The same anatomical structures have, due to the fundamentally different physics of these modalities, they have an incredibly different appearance that makes it both exciting to work with that data, but also requires a lot of domain knowledge. It's very local and it's very volatile. So you have no idea how volatile it is until you picked up an ultrasound probe and scanned either yourself, added B mode, like the velocity imaging with it, and then when you put it on the same place, all the anatomy is shifted. And then if you see how doctors actually, how interactively they scan patients with these imaging modalities, you only grasp how challenging this all is. It's super exciting, super interesting. And there's limited field of view, and there's time-varying anatomy, right? And then to put this together, so the aim is, of course, to basically do robust image fusion. So you have clinical targets from pre-op data that you want to map into the true location in the patient during the procedure. I am mixing all sorts of modalities and clinical applications. So that image is from, is this thing working, by the way? Anyway, so this is from a spine surgery setup, right? So you have an X-ray image of the spine, and you have tracked tools and things like that. These images are abdominal, this could be cranial, contrast X-ray, and this is visceral surgery. So I'm mixing the image data on purpose all over the place, but the fundamental challenge is very similar here, that basically this needs to be all put together, and then if everything's very precisely mapped, there's many coordinate systems involved, and this is what makes it super challenging, right? So this is sort of the overall challenge, is to bring pre-op information, planning information together with a very organic, fast-changing intraoperative environment. You saw it in some of the videos, so respiration, cardiac motion, and additional organ deformation could also be motion of an alien embryo, doesn't matter, so it's super challenging, right? So I hope that sets a little bit the context to what we do. With this, I'm just giving sort of a quick company overview and go into the main technical building blocks, and this will show a lot of the imaging and a lot of the algorithms at some point. So we are a company now of currently 80 people and very senior people and a very interdisciplinary team as well. Most of them computer scientists and research scientists, but with this very interdisciplinary background in understanding of imaging physics and clinical applications, right? Because that's sort of the essence of the work we do. We are very special. We have a very special business model also. We usually say that we are this trinity of a consulting company. So we do contract R&D work just like TNG, but also a software provider because we license a product-grade medical imaging SDK that makes all these things possible. And to some extent, we're an independent research lab trying to also churn out some actual publications and innovation every year. And with this, we often start with even early scoping with some startups or some de-risking of a project. We do the contract R&D, and this is the key selling point is that when between research and product implementation, you do not have to reinvent the wheel. You can rely on a product set of libraries that allow us to take the research and make it a product. And I'll go into more details of how we make this possible. Unfortunately, we can only name by now a fraction of our customers because it's just crazy, interesting, and sometimes confidential stuff that they do, but it's from large corporations to small, very innovative startups that come with ideas to us. Therefore, so the main product really that really drives our business is, again, the contract work together with a medical imaging SDK. It has all sort of the boring aspects that you need, like a very fast medical DICOM platform, all the registration segmentation building blocks and things like that, and it's certification grade. That's really the point. We put a lot of work in to make sure when you put it on a medical device, it becomes a lot easier to make it a product. We have the ImFusion suite, which is sort of our visual computing front end. So this really sort of exposes all. So algorithms are not black box, but we exhibit, we show how they iterate, how they progress, how they fuse the data and things like that. So everything that ends up more boxed later on is exposed here in what I always like to call sort of a visual computing paradigm. And then we have a pretty impressive labeling software that we just simply needed for all of our projects because we often need to bootstrap medical data labeling. And so we wrote sort of the best tool in the industry, in my opinion, for that as well. These are sort of the main building blocks or technology themes that we excel at. And this roughly corresponds to departments in the company, but it's more complex than that. We have more divisions, we have subgroups and things like that. Of course, we have machine learning, we have general SDK and anatomy, we have robotics, and then basically one department for each main interventional imaging modality that is that we do projects with, or that basically has market share, if you will, and that is super relevant. Start with machine learning. The brilliant head of our machine learning team, Raphael Prévost, is in the audience, and he has built a team that basically makes sure the entire company, everyone in the company can train models for all our customers. And this is oftentimes like standard segmentation models, like bread and butter sort of anatomical segmentation, but oftentimes also very innovative other schemes like kind of like image-wise regression for deep learning reconstruction, some computer vision things, robotics and other use cases. And of course, a key focus there is on reproducibility and deploying sort of the exact same numerics that you have during training on an actual medical device and the reproducibility of that. And then what we often do with customers, often they could be implant companies, they want to build their first medical device, they have no idea about the data collection, so we help them really bootstrap the data collection, we assist them or do the entire model training ourselves. Raphael's team actually really excels also at getting started with few amounts of data sets. That's also something not everyone can do. We can start with 10, 20 data sets for a non-pathological segmentation project, and then we increase as we go. And even increasingly, I was going to mention this in the discussion, to get things through CE and FDA, there's a lot more rigor that is required from us, especially by the FDA recently, because everyone is just throwing more and more AI at topics. So we make sure we have model cards, we can trace everything that we do, we know where the patient population comes from, what kind of scanners we use and things like that, all sort of by design. And then also, not last but not least, there's a lot of own research that we try to do. These are just some examples with hyper networks and also graph convolution networks that we do in machine learning to stay at sort of the top notch of technology. Anatomy, so this starts, I'm just putting some general themes in there from a visual computing framework, a lot of advanced rendering visualization, a lot of multimodal registration in general. So this kind of thing is what still happens a lot. These are image-based algorithms that iterate, they assess the alignment of, let's say, a CT and MRI, and then we have proprietary and very innovative ways of both optimizing and assessing the similarity. And this we've done for, I have done this for 25 years and in the company for 14 years now. These are still pixel-wise, GPU-accelerated, image-based algorithms where we inject carefully ever more AI and machine learning, right? And this makes it super robust. And what we have done, we built an anatomy team that has created a pretty amazing overall software architecture that then sort of has derivatives for the major sort of abdominal regions and organs that we deal with. And basically, oftentimes these are very hybrid algorithms, right? So you want to jointly segment, register, reconstruct, motion compensate, and the information you need there is, of course, the voxel data, but you do extract key points, meshes, label maps, cut planes, and things like that, and you need to sort of deal with them together while you deform the voxel data and things like that. So, and there's modality-specific models, and there's graph neural networks also that we have sort of embedded in that. So this is, I don't have the time to go into details, but basically this is a very impressive overall software engineering concept that we came up with there. And this allows then also to basically do a lot of stuff with 3D and 4D image processing. In the end, the buzzword that you often have there is digital twinning, right? So we try to build digital twins. This is a 4D hard model with graph neural networks, and I think also tetrahedral meshes actually, because you have a very thin boundary between some of the cardiac structures that can be instantiated. I think in this case, this comes from a 4D CT, to be honest. It's not very impressive, but we are working with customers that we instantiated from the smallest, most partial robotic ultrasound from within the heart, for instance. It could be ICE or TEE if you're familiar with these kind of modalities, right? And so obviously a lot of companies are working on this as well, and specifically for certain clinical applications, but we try to have sort of the broad technology building blocks for that. Our robotics team, we cannot compete with every sort of robotic startup in the world. Let me just go back one more time. But so we do a lot of medical robotics and the classical robotics control pipeline specifically for medical use cases. These are some examples. We want to make it easier to get started with standard manipulator robots. We have a bunch of impressive demos, whether it's robotic laminectomy or an OR assistant here. I think there's actually, oh no, these are not videos. So these are example projects of sort of our classic pipeline that we developed. In parallel, we are working on, of course, robotic imitation learning. So this is work from our team where we took the Pi0 model from physical intelligence, I think, adapted it for robotic ultrasound demo. And this was shown actually last year at NVIDIA GTC and the healthcare keynote, which we are very proud of. And so we understand these technologies and we embed them in some of our projects, but we also learn how to combine them exactly with the classical stack, right? So we need to provide guardrails, that basically all the stuff that we do on a patient remains super precise and accurate, right? So the key here will be to sort of combine these technologies with the classic robotic stack that we have. And there we also sort of have a strong architecture and framework aspect to it, right? If you do robotics, especially with ROS 2, it's super complex also from a DevOps standpoint and library integration, and we excel at that as well. So we can get teams starting that have no background in robotic very, very easily. So lower basically the barrier of entry there. Now, briefly, just to give some impressions, our 3 modality groups, and it shows already some of the clinical applications here now. So in ultrasound, of course, again, as in everything that we do, the focus is on complex imaging challenges. So we detect and do feature extraction, we do robotics. We're pretty known for deep learning-based 3D reconstruction of 3D ultrasound from untracked data, actually. That's one of the things that we do a lot. We do a lot of multimodality registration. This goes back to my own PhD at TUM together with Siemens in Princeton many years ago. And some people, and this is beautiful, are working very hard to make my PhD's work obsolete with some very innovative deep learning versions of that, right? And this is exactly what we have to do to basically make everything even more robust and fast. And then the typical models that we train there are pretty diverse, right? So as I mentioned, there's orientation hypothesis for global initialization of where is an ultrasound within the body of a large CT, for instance. There's tracking estimation, there's direct segmentation of heart structures for structural heart interventions or ultrasound measurements directly derived from the image data, vessels, and you name it. The CT group does everything with interventional X-ray, but actually also cone beam reconstruction and inverse problems, which is super impressive that they kind of also have that. If you think about it, the kind of 2D, 3D registration that we do a lot is actually the forward projector of iterative CT reconstruction. So that's why it's actually synergetic, right? But I don't have time to go into details. Oh, I'm already spending too much time, I see. We do a lot of research on also synthesizing DRRs and 3D from 2D individual X-ray shots. The vision team, this is also a super interesting modality, does a lot of work on real-time AI and real-time vision algorithms. And again, this combination of classic computer vision and AI. This is just some point tracking that is needed for other downstream tasks. One of them could be this, actually. This is a project also that we demoed together with NVIDIA for robotic partial nephrectomy. So you have to, and this is with Intuitive, you see the Da Vinci name here. So this is on the Intuitive platform, but just demoed on their data and run parallel in the OR, actually. So we can do these kind of things as well, these real-time aspects. And then we do surgical tool tracking and a bunch of other things as well. Another aspect, this just took longer to start, are, now the videos don't play, just a second. So a lot of the endoscopes are stereo endoscopes and some are monocular, right? And so depending on what you have, you can do monocular SLAM, you have to do a deep learning-based depth estimation, or you do stereo SLAM. And this is also a whole huge set of problem formulations that are super interesting that we are dealing with in our endoscopy and vision team. There's no time to go into details there. I could have one single slide for each publication, but the research lab aspect is also that we try to identify topics where we think we can excel and we can give some value and showcase also the power of, so the innovative spirit of our team paired with sort of the software framework that we have. Now, this was maybe already a little bit too dry to put this back in context of our customer application. So I cannot show the most exciting stuff that we do, unfortunately, but basically, if you think of the 3 videos that I showed, the first one is basically a navigation platform, and the standard one is, this is from our customer Stryker, where we are actually involved in cranial and spine navigation. So you have a nav system with a camera and tracked surgical tools. This is basically where you could do sort of this needle guidance with, but many other things, craniotomy and brain surgery and things like that. If you move towards robotics, this is our customer Globus Medical, where you have now a robotic platform that could do a lot more, and it could do stuff autonomously. There's now companies that have 3 robotic arms in spine surgery. It's super exciting where this field is moving. But of course, first version is always more conservative. So it's, the first version is it's just holding the drill, and then it's almost the same as sort of a navigation system on the left. But it's still, it has the platform has the potential with more precise software engineering and AI to become more automated. And last but not least, and this refers a little bit to the last video I showed, you could have an entire treatment platform. So this is the system by our customer Histosonics, where you have diagnostic ultrasound image on a robotic arm, and this is a focused histotripsy treatment platform that can do a lot of different things. So here, you could imagine this thing does a lot of stuff automatic, right? And so we are basically on a lot of these, we provide sort of the medical imaging, heavy lifting, and software platform to a big extent. The kind of stuff that we do for those customers, this is just some overall impressions again, sort of with this visual computing idea that we have underlying all of it. And also I mentioned from the Severance video that we actually do this. So the Strike and Nav system would be a platform, but because this is a large company, we only do some aspects of it. But we have worked with startups where essentially we wrote the entire thing for it, very close to what is shown in Severance. So this is a borehole procedure for an emergency draining of the excess fluid in the ventricles due to some trauma, right? And so the entire software is from us, a very lean project. In a few months we completed it, and this is basically everything there to build sort of a nav platform on our software stack. Also, many modalities combined are in examples for instance, bronchoscopy navigation. This could be robotic or it could be hand inserted. You have some deep learning-based segmentation of a lesion. You have you sort of track the real endoscopic or bronchoscopic video feed. You have a simulated one from CT. You see when you're in the wrong bifurcation, you pull back and go into the right one because you have your 3D visual rendering model. You go back into the right branch. This is still just on a phantom. Then once you're done, you start another modality, which is interventional fluoro. You do catheter tracking with AI. You have the lesion there as well. And this is your oval navigation platform. And this kind of things we can do with very little work based on our software stack. Another example, not much time to go into it, but we oftentimes have modalities where you bridge sort of the dimensionality, the gap of scale, right? So this is OCT, intravascular OCT, optical coherence tomography, which is tiny. You can identify plaque and things like that. And if you map that on sort of the coronary artery tree derived from a contrast CT scan, it has to be the best high-resolution contrast CT that you can imagine. Then you can fuse it together, overlay it, but you see when you zoom in onto a CT scan that you really have huge voxels sort of fused together with much smaller information. And the beauty is that it's so complementary, right? And this is why we are trying to fuse this kind of data sets. I have to move faster, I'm afraid, but so this is another aspect where there's a lot of visualization involved. This is contextual cutaway visualization. This is something that I already worked on even before ImFusion at Siemens. And it uses segmentation derived from a 4D CT scan. It sort of then has a beating heart, rendering visualization, all with segmentations. And this is what we then later upgraded also with GCNs and graph neural networks. And then you have an ICE catheter information that is tracked and visualized all in there as well. So this is a platform for structural heart interventions that we also work with customer projects. The rest of, or just a few more slides, a little bit biased because I worked on this myself for our customer Histosonics. Again, this robotic ultrasound platform. This is an animal model, and this is trying to convey the complexity of deriving a patient-specific respiration model. So what we do here is we extract inhale, exhale, but then when you do that, it doesn't show up very nicely here. You would throw away a lot of the slice information. So what we try to do is we actually reconstruct the 3D ultrasound slices in a way that it becomes actually a dense respiration model, and then this can be used to assess if there's the tumor somewhere here, to specifically assess what margins do you need during treatment, because the respiration might vary a little bit. This is still under anesthesia and things like that, but sort of there is the possibility of doing that as well. Another aspect there is based on our software platform, we can easily change the UI to do basically stuff like this. This is, this is based on our suite. We just take sort of the customer look and feel that we got from their design team, and then prototype everything that we need to do. Another impressive aspect of that work is that we actually retrofitted very old data that came from freehand ultrasound, and we reconstructed it and registered it sort of at the same time. So this is untracked data, but we kind of put it together to make sense of one of the earliest human trial data sets, right? And then you go through sort of the landmark fusion workflow. You still have to click a landmark pair to initialize the fusion here, and then you have a good deformable image-based registration step that squeezes. You'll see that in a minute. That nicely squeezes the the anatomical structures into place, and it really like pushes down the liver also, and then everything snaps in and you have the ImFusion. And this became the product platform. They still revamped the UI. This is how their software looks like right now, actually, but everything that's in the middle is from us, but they replaced it with their own UI, and we still maintain sort of our prototypes there. Recent success story, and this is also interesting, we worked with a company that can take, let's not say shortcuts, but can work very flexibly in terms of regulatory aspects, but still perfectly legal, because they operate in Germany and, let's say, another country in the world. And they take our stuff. They contracted us, I think, with 4 or 5 FTE of labor. And we put our platform into everything, and there was a first in human with a neurosurgery system that went very well based on that. To the point that it scared us a little bit, and we had to push them even more to do sort of even more V&V on our end, but this is possible with our framework. And they're also working on a robotic exoscope platform. So what is mind-boggling there is actually we have customers that operate at vastly different speeds, right? But we want to enable and be able to make all of them somehow faster, right? This is where I won't have enough time, I assume, but just a few impressions of sort of, so I still talk a lot about, and I'm very passionate about software architecture, whether my team likes it or not, because I'm becoming less and less useful there, but what we're trying to do is have one platform from research to medical product, and there's obviously a contradiction, and sort of you have to incrementally stabilize the framework. We started with a C++ and OpenGL framework, so fully platform independent, very modular, plug-in based and factory-based infrastructure, and a GPU-first visual computing paradigm. This then has actually APIs and bindings for different programming languages. There's also .NET that we've done and things like that. And the idea is, of course, it's a rich ecosystem of product-grade libraries, especially also DICOM and rendering and things like that. And from the rest of the features and the data structures, one important aspect is that this organic aspect of the problems that we solve, like deformations are pixel-wise shader includes that can be added, and they don't add any or as little computational overhead as possible. They're at the core of our data models and things like that. Maybe one conceptual idea here also is that we call it sort of a rapid prototyping environment, but it's not a visual rapid prototyping environment. There are approaches where you basically have sort of a scene graph editor or scene graph based environment. We specifically decided against it. So basically you still have to write a few lines of code, whether it's schema or Python or C++. Of course, nowadays you'll vibe code those and then they link against our SDK, right? But this is sort of some of the main architecture decisions. Our Python SDK team is an important, really, division in our company now, and they specifically write Python bindings and they make them Pythonic. So the translation from C++ is basically very specific to best practices in Python to make sure we can keep the C++ GPU performance, but have like a native Python ecosystem. And this includes, of course, visualization, stuff embedded in the console and many other things. And our powerful classic workstation native app is combined nicely with the way modern data scientists work. This is also interesting, and you can put this up on your phone if you want. This is or any laptop and tablet, especially if you get private DICOM data from I don't know, a medical condition you might have, then you can just visualize it here. For the increasing trend to have zero footprint browser application environments, what we do is we take our C++ and GPU code base and convert it with WebAssembly and WebGL, because this solves our customers' needs best. They still need us always to run stuff on edge on medical devices, but we can use the same product grade code base in the browser through WebAssembly. So this is specific. I'm not aware of anyone else who's doing it exactly this way, but here we have very successfully built a web SDK team around this. And of course, also there's a modular client-server web architecture that we're building together with actually TNG, and our great consultant Vasil is also here. He's actually my mentor for the invited talk. Here he is, yeah, of course, right. So thank you for your great work. You're a big part of that strategy, actually. This is basically it. So I think I will have some time for discussion, so that is nice. A bunch of ideas for discussion before you start hopefully peppering me with questions. So we are very interdisciplinary, as I mentioned. So we work with this triangle of medical device companies, academia, and clinicians. We insist, and this has not changed in all those years, that a visual computing real-time GPU framework is essential for interventional guidance in robotics, which we continue to evolve, of course. We always combine different technologies. It's a little bit like in autonomous driving, right? There's also often a classical vision pipeline and some end-to-end AI pipeline. It's the same thing with us. And from a software architecture standpoint, the more modalities and data sources are used simultaneously, the harder it is to make sure it doesn't fall apart, right? And we found, I think, a very good sweet spot to add a lot of information in real time, still have flexibility for research, and keeping the architecture clean and stable. Recent trend is really that there's a lot more pushback by us, especially the FDA through some of our customers in the US, of betting on AI-based algorithms, and there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of things to do, but then everyone is using at least sort of the LLM type of AI for all of these steps as well, right? Which makes it all very fuzzy as well. So it's in that sense, it's super interesting times, but it also has a lot of potential for more technologies. And this is probably going to be the first question anyway. What are you going to do with vibe coding and things like that? We talk about this a lot, of course, right? And but there's also a huge amount of opportunities in that context. Something that didn't shine through so much, it's our job to bring clarity actually for our customers in this context, right? So, and so, of course, we are looking into, let's say, foundation models for segmentation. There's one from Facebook, MedSam2, that was adapted. So we integrate that as well. We benchmark it, we test it, and we do some of these things as well. And physical AI is also very interesting. But this is sort of concluding back to the video from the Alien Prometheus movie that I showed. It seems like with imitation learning, and you have a new physical AI YouTube video that does more impressive stuff every day, but you still have to make it work with sub-millimeter precision every day in a surgery with 100% accuracy all the time. And this is where we come in to try to sort of bridge the gap between all the classical engineering and the modern tools. With this, I'll be very happy to take some interesting discussion.
Thank you for the amazing talk, and I think we have time for a couple of questions.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. My question is about regulation and how do you prove robustness and reproducibility across different clinical settings? How it's from the lab, from like your test setting to everywhere in the world. How do you prove, or what does the FDA want from you, for example?
So yeah, that's a very broad question, but usually, and this has not changed, is you cannot prove. So the more you do computer-aided, you cannot prove that it always works. So what you have to do is prove your risk mitigation strategy and that it's sensible, right? So at all the steps where you have an either AI algorithm, or it's actually the same for a classic algorithm, especially for, let's say, the formal registration in Fusion or some AI which extracts anatomy, you have a verification step where the surgeon or doctor or interventional radiologist can see what the computer did and can sign off on it and is responsible further down the road for the rest of the procedure. This has not changed. This was always accepted by regulatory authorities. It's a little bit of a different story in pathology AI that makes treatment decisions, right? But when talking to regulatory bodies, you have to basically discuss this overall risk mitigation strategy, right? That the human in the loop can assess whether the computer does something useful, which is why also stuff in this Prometheus video, again, is feasible from an engineering standpoint, but it will take a few years from a regulatory standpoint until someone, except in a very specific third world country, accepts that thing on patients, right? So that's a brief answer, but the goalposts are moving there. So there's we can now AI generate a lot of the paperwork for CE and FDA filing, which is very interesting, but we have to sort through all these documents and sort through the noise to then still arrive at the strategy that that makes sense for this overall risk mitigation, and the V&V, the validation verification, is super important. That is also to some extent AI assisted, but again, this is all moving fast, but everyone, nothing is changing in the fact that it will not be fully autonomous for quite some time. There is some experienced surgeon who has to know, he has to watch the algorithms and the pipeline. That's sort of the brief answer I could give.
Hi, yeah.
Yep.
I'm curious about, all this image acquisition, the transformations, the registration involves a lot of data, of course, in the end. The transformations themselves end up with the non-linear ones becoming bigger than the images. So I'm curious how much of that you're still storing in the end, and how I/O bound you end up in these real-time settings.
Well, in the real-time setting, it's not so. Companies like NVIDIA, of course, like to promote the use cases where you have like 4K endoscopy video streams, but then to do something useful with them, you actually don't need them in 4K, right? So you might be able to do with a lot less bandwidth. So the real-time bandwidth is more like the complexity of the precise, time-stamped, deterministic way of operating on this kind of data and synchronizing it, than the sheer bandwidth. For that, there is nice GPU platforms now, and we also integrate some of them. I'm not sure whether your question would also be the data you need to do anything. So we need a lot of data, of course, as everything that we do becomes more AI-driven. Right now, we bootstrap things on publicly available data sets from the academic community. If they're allowed, we even use them if they're not legal for commercial use, fully internally only, but then we have to switch to something that has a commercial license that is permissive, and then we typically start with some way of clinical partners of our customers to basically acquire data for that specific use case. So that's always some work there. Right now, we do not act as a data broker in a sense that we don't take data from multiple customers and offer it to all of them in a data broker fashion. We just every customer has to bring their data. But I think your question was more like about the interventional bandwidth, right? But so yeah.
I think there was a.
To continue with your data discussion point, when I was doing medical research, we always struggled very hard to find enough data. What sizes of data sets do you have for training these kinds of merging between different imaging?
So this again varies a lot, but you can do a useful project with 10 to 20 data sets if there's no exotic anatomy. If you want to segment something and test something, and then then what happens in a typical project, we have done a very large number of projects, and at some point you decide whether you make this whole technology more data-driven, and you need hundreds or thousands of data, and you want to train an AI to cover exotic patient anatomy and very specific edge cases, or whether you invest more into, let's say, an interactive refinement step that the user does, because it's not worth it. And this can also be decided whether or not you have access to this kind of exotic data, right? So we often have these decision points in projects. But yeah, between a few dozen scans of a certain anatomy and a few thousand, this is what or at least many hundreds, right, Raphael, I guess, but many hundreds of data sets, and maybe sometimes thousands, we would train data. Train models on that data, yes.
Ladies first.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. That's an impromptu question. I was just triggered by something you said. So you mentioned that it's okay as long as you don't have some exotic anatomy, but also from my experience in the medical field, some anatomies that are not very exotic actually are already quite exotic for the medical field due to some bias in their models. Do you have projects, or is there something done in this way to make sure that these technologies will work for all different kinds of anatomies?
So yeah, this is ultimately the responsibility of our customers. And then again, the easiest way to go about this is to always visualize what the AI does, such that you don't have to cover every edge use case. We have seen actually, we are in a project, and at some point I see a data set where the liver is on the left, and this is like freaking everyone out. The AI doesn't work, nothing works. And if you look it up, it's every 10,000th human being has a liver on the other side. There's variants to that, where other stuff is mirrored as well and stuff like that. So this is horrible, right? So let's take Histosonics. I think we discussed it with them. They would just refuse to do the planning on this. You just have to go more, like only do the in situ interventional steps there, right? So you have to, you would also then look at it from a business standpoint, right? You don't invest a lot of engineering for every 10,000 patient that has a liver on the other side. So stuff like that.
My example was a bit more focused on, we know that in most medical applications, standard male body usually has more chances of success than a standard female body, for example. So do you have, also in general, do you have benchmarks where you can, for example, test the precision? Because if you put a drug in the market, you need to show, right, that your drug has a percentage of benefit above everything else. So here you should also have some benchmarks where you can show in different settings that you have an extra percentage of, for example, precision. Are there benchmarks, and can you prove that?
I think so. And so at RSNA and ECR, the more radiology-centric conferences, and there's a lot of discussion about this. We are not so much in the business of end-to-end sort of pathology AI, but our core expertise is sort of interventional guidance. So, but we had to really, for the FDA, prove exactly this male versus female population ethnicity, then stuff, people have to be 50% from the US, and China it's 50% from China. So these kind of things are becoming also more strict from the regulatory authorities, and for a good reason. And this is causing more overhead. We try to tackle it, of course, with good computational infrastructure. But right now, we have not developed, well, actually we have, but so we have pushed even diagnostic AI over the finish line with customers. And we are involved in that. And please discuss details also with Raphael about this later. So, yes.
I think we have time for one final question.
Yeah, thanks for that interesting talk. So we are also using ultrasound for studying muscle and tendon interaction, and we are at the user side, so we are not developing ultrasounds. But one problem we face is that typically for high-resolution ultrasound systems, they are medical devices, and we are not really accessing the raw data. So how do you deal with the data or the data collection in your research?
This is a very good question, actually, and I'd love to spend 10 minutes talking about this, basically, because this is also a theme, actually, that there's a lot of research where you think you can gain an edge by not looking at the image that was funneled from the physical sensors through a very complex image processing pipeline to get the best sort of specificity and sensitivity for a human on the screen, right? But you use the raw data and directly feed the raw data, in this case, let's say channel capture RF ultrasound, into an AI, right? There's a lot of research on that. The hype has been sort of going down a little bit because it's super hard to yield superior outcomes, because after all, the AI is very flexible. And what you see on the screen is pretty optimal in some sense. What we do, for instance, for this deep learning-based tracking estimation, we try to take out the speckle filter, and it looks very noisy and grainy because the actual speckle has reproducible information. So it actually has more information than the highly processed images. So there we go. So we have to, of course, work with what the customer gets us and what access we get from a system, but we sometimes choose between OEM, just point of care ultrasound, to like semi pre-scan converted data access to full channel capture access. More recently, we haven't had like a medical device where we really needed to use this channel data access. And it's similar to that we also in the CT group work on the projection data and sort of do smart stuff in this realm between the raw data of the X-ray projections. This could even be pre-flat field corrected and stuff like that, to the fully reconstructed image. You can do innovative stuff in between. But so this was always, we always talked about this in the early years of the company, and there was quite some hype. More recently, I think since everything's data-driven, you can just take a good B-mode ultrasound image and you're fine for many of the use cases as well. But we continue to be compatible also with like channel capture and RF systems. So that's a very brief response. And I continue to love this topic. It's actually a very nice idea that you optimize imaging. So trends in academia were always like you optimize imaging for your specific clinical use case, and you now optimize it also, if you can, for the AI or for the computer vision or for the processing. In the latter, I think there was less tangible outcome than some people would have expected, because the pipeline is already very optimized to what you can perceive as a human, and it's kind of like, but yeah, so this is just what I'm hearing in recent years. But it's a super interesting field of research to go closer to the sensor. Inject the AI right at the sensor, you have a high bandwidth, but you have the potential to get out something more. Basically, you don't care whether you use B-mode or Doppler ultrasound. You just take the raw data, you have everything at once. You have pulsation, velocity, and the AI figures it out, right? Because these things are kind of, you're probably doing stuff like that. This is very exciting. Let's talk later. So, very good. Yeah.
Thank you again for the amazing talk.
Thank you. Thank you, vielen Dank.